All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I see a few people are coming in still, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We got a night packed full of really good information. So my name is Joanna Wright. I am the Agriculture and Natural Resources Program Assistant here at Athens-Clarke County Extension. The name on the screen tonight is obviously not mine. It's Laura Ney, our agriculture agent. I'm sure a lot of you have spoken with her or even with myself before. Laura wasn't able to make it tonight, so I'll be representing us. But her contact information is on this slide. If you have any questions about the lecture, after the lecture, or just any questions in general about your yard, gardening, your farm, anything like that, we're here to help you. It's a free resource. And so we also have social media and an e-newsletter where we send out once a month to give you timely gardening related articles, local events, that kind of thing. We also advertise this class every month in there. And so a lot of people ask us how to keep up with the upcoming classes. The best way to do that is to subscribe to our Shades of Green newsletter. And so I'm sure, as all of you know, tonight is our Green Thumb lecture for June. It's on drought tolerant gardening. We're really excited about this topic. It's one that is not only timely, even though it has rained recently quite crazily in Athens, but a lot of times in the summer we deal with drought. So we're excited to have this topic. It's a very useful topic. And so some housekeeping things. While our speaker is giving the presentation, we ask that you stay muted, but you are welcome to ask questions along the way. And you can do so by using the chat feature. And a little practice, I'm sure a lot of you are used to using Zoom by now with the crazy year that we've had. But if not, just go up to where you can have your little control panel and hit the chat button. And if everybody could just tell me where you are watching this from to kind of give us some practice from the chat, make sure everybody knows how to use that. And it looks like a few people are putting some things in. So yeah, tell us where you're watching from. And throughout the presentation, like I said, you're welcome to ask questions. And then at the end, we'll hopefully have some time where you can keep asking questions in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourselves. We'll let you know when the time comes for that. And I may interrupt our speaker a few times with some of your questions, but if I don't ask your question throughout the presentation, we will be getting to it. I'll make sure to write it down so we don't miss it. So first, before our speaker starts the presentation, I do want to introduce Lori Lofton. She's with our Public Utilities Department, and she specializes in water conservation, and she has a few things to talk about, especially to you Athens-Clarke County residents. So Lori, I will go ahead and give it away to you. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you everybody for letting me take just a few minutes before the presentation to share a bit with you about what we've got available through Athens-Clarke County. As part of the Water Conservation Office, of course, we want to help our customers use water most efficiently. That helps you to keep your water bills down, and believe it or not, we would like for you to have your water bill as low as possible, because it makes you very happy and it makes us happy too. And one of the things that we encourage people to do is to install native plants, drought tolerant plants, and we ask people to be mindful when you're planting your gardens and what you're putting in to begin with, because we will get some phone calls from people upset after they've put in an expensive, the plants can be expensive to install, and then we'll get phone calls from people upset because the water bill was so high and they didn't anticipate how much watering was going to be required for the water, and it can push people up in the tiers into the higher cost for your water. So we had an intern working with us. She was a graduate assistant over at UGA in the landscape design and architecture area, and she helped us to come up with something that we call H2 Grow. And if you saw this at the last meeting, I apologize for seeing it again, but just a refresher here. So H2 Grow, what this is selected native plants. And the person helped us by selecting which plants would work well together, both on watering needs, height, color, and created some gardens. I don't know about you, but for me, a big challenge I have when choosing my garden is what goes where, how do I put it, what's it going to look like? I just don't know what to put together. So there's 3 different pre-designed gardens to choose from. One is the Sunnyside selection. All of this also is available at accgov.com/h2grow. You've got the Painted Piedmont and also a Shady Sanctuary. And the Sunnyside and Piedmont are both designed for areas with lots of sun. The Shade, obviously not. And we call the 2 sun ones water-wise because we're confident those will use less water that could qualify for a drought-tolerant water-wise landscape. The Shade selection, Shady Sanctuary, those plants might require a little more watering than the ones in the sun. So we aren't referring to that one as water-wise. But at the H2 Grow, you can click on the link here and it will bring up, hold on a moment. It will pull up a design guide for you and it will tell you, it first shows you what the finished product would look like when the plants are all in full bloom. There's a garden design. We have one that's a rectangle and one that's an oval to choose from. All that you have to do is look at the number of the plant, the number 1. You see where to plant it in your landscape. So it's a plant by number design. The plants all tell a little bit about what they'll look like, as well as the height spread, what kind of pollinator they attract. All of the plants the gardens do attract pollinators, how you can repurpose any sod that you remove. Turf grass is the number 1 watered crop in America, and that is something we don't even eat. We pretty much just mow it. So we encourage people to pull out your lawn, they're thirsty, put in the native plant, or if you've got a bare spot and you're trying to figure out what to put in, here are some suggestions. On the back, well, this guide is available at COFRS, and on the back you'll see that there is also maintenance information, recommendations on how to care for the plants throughout the year. COFRS has been working with us on this promotion, and they have the guides available. They can also help you in plant selection. Occasionally, some of the plants are not available. Native plants are pretty hot, and so they've been moving quickly. They'll help you to select an alternative that can fill in for a missing plant. Another thing I do want to share with you is something called Your Better Yard. And this is another way when trying to decide on what you want your landscape to look like, making sure that it fits your lifestyle so that what you're putting in is going to work for your family, for if you've got dogs, if you have a small area. This gives you some suggestions. One other thing I want to share with you, and this is available on our website. If you go to thinkatthesink.com, you can find our outdoor watering tips. And we have the 2021 outdoor watering schedule. This is the non-drought schedule. Should anything change, drought can happen quickly. We had a drought, you may not even be aware of it. We had a drought about 2 years ago. It was what they referred to as a flash drought, and came in about October, November, and stayed with us until I think it was February. So they can occur at any place and or at any time, and that's when we will adjust the schedule. But this is schedule based on what the Georgia Water Stewardship Act has in place. So you can also look at this. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Johanna. Thank you so much for letting me share all of this information.
Thank you, Lori. It's very practical and super applicable to tonight. So thank you for coming on and sharing with us. So without further ado, I will go ahead and hand it over to Julie Darnell, as she is our speaker for tonight. Julie is a master gardener with us and also a longtime professional gardener. I'll let her kind of introduce herself more. But like I said, guys, if you have questions, it looks like you all know how to use the chat pretty well. So I'll be around to answer any questions, and Julie will as well. So Julie, go ahead and take it away. Oh, Julie, you are muted. Sorry. I do it all the time.
There we go. How's that?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Joanna and Lori. I am excited to talk about this subject. It's something that that I deal with a lot as a gardener. I have am a master gardener and I work as a professional gardener. I've lived and gardened in many different climates, and including, Seattle. And water was a concern at some point or another with all the climates. And I happened to be living in Athens during the 2011 and 2012 drought, where we were very concerned at that time, even about running out of drinking water. So it was a time where we had severe water restrictions, and there was after I had recently moved into my house, I planted a lot of plants that weren't very established yet, and you had to watch a lot of them go at that point. So now I think a lot about what I'm planting and what it's going to take to keep it alive. And you might think, after living through something like that, well, is it ethically, is it good to garden? I'm sorry. Let's see here. And why do we care about there's several reasons why we would care about, planting, doing drought tolerant planting. One is environmental concerns, water scarcity. The other is fiscal concerns. When you start watering in the middle of summer, you get into that second tier and your bill really does go up. And then there's garden concerns. You want your plants to survive. I wanted to talk a little bit about drought tolerance versus xeriscaping. When we think about xeriscaping, we think what comes to mind is often this sort of cactus garden like the Southwest has. And the word xeriscaping actually translates to dry landscape or dry gardening. And it's defined as a landscape which requires little or no watering. And to give you kind of an idea of what our water status is in Athens, in the drought of 2011 and 2012, we received just over 37 inches of water both years. And our average is about 46 inches of water a year. But last year, we had over 60 inches of water, rain. So if you think, if you had that feeling last year during the pandemic that it was raining all the time, it was raining a lot. In comparison, Austin, Texas, their average is 39 inches of water a year. So in xeriscaping, you want to plant, you're basically planting landscapes that require very little water. In drought tolerance, you're planting landscapes that can survive on little water, but also they can survive those months where we receive 9 inches of rain. So in August of 2020, we had 9 inches of rain. So xeriscaping in Georgia basically means drought tolerant plants that don't mind water. So you're not going to plant the same types of plants in Georgia that you would plant in Arizona, because a lot of those plants will not survive with that much water. And here's an example of what xeriscaping in Georgia would look like. You've got lots of salvias and some sedums and some evening primrose, poppies in the back. So the 7 principles of xeriscaping are basically having a sound landscape planning and design. You want the limitation of the lawn to appropriate functional areas, the area that you actually use. Use of water efficient plants, efficient irrigation, soil amendments, and use of mulches, and then appropriate landscape maintenance. So you're weeding and pruning things that were going to help your landscape stay healthy. And this is an example. These are cannas. Canna are great. They they'll withstand lots of water. They will stand no water. And this example on the left there has your canna, and then some ornamental grasses, both of which are extremely drought tolerant. And then the coleus, which does very well. It's not as drought tolerant as the canna, but it's a tough plant too. And you can find all kinds of variety of canna. The one on the far right isn't blooming yet, but it's got that beautiful zebra striped leaf. So gardens can help the environment. You might think, okay, is it worth it to garden? And they really can be very, very beneficial. And that's the kind of gardening that, that we're going to talk about today. Gardens can help control urban temperatures through shade and evapotranspiration, through providing shade. They can absorb rainwater, preventing runoff. and they provide habitats for wildlife, insects, reptiles, and birds. There's a lot of predictions that have proven true. We do have higher temperatures. We might have similar amounts of rainfall, but it's more erratic. There'll be larger gaps between often between those rains, those good solid rains that we get. We have growing population in our communities, and that entails an increased demand on water supply. So we want to think about gardens where they're not going to take up a lot of resources, and they're going to be beneficial to the environment, and that means choosing the right plants and using gardening techniques that mitigate environmental stresses. Here's an example of another drought tolerant garden. You have some sage in the front, lots of black-eyed Susan. It's you some looks like some euphorbia down towards the right. You'll notice with a lot of these gardens where the planting is dense, the plants have filled in, that is going to help shade the ground and protect the dirt, protect the moisture that's in the dirt, so you're not losing as much moisture. Here's an example of a garden. It is filled in and shaded, but these plants, these hosta and these hydrangea, are going to require more water during times of drought to keep them alive than other plants will. So what we'll cover today, we'll talk about the most important key to drought tolerance. We'll look at some drought tolerant gardening techniques, including planting and mulching and watering, and we'll talk about some plant choices. And on the right-hand side, I've put on a lot of the slides some plants that are considered drought tolerant. The lantana, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, really needs almost no water and is great for pollinators. So the most important factor in drought tolerance is soil. Your soil health is going to really determine how well your plants weather any kind of extreme stresses, including drought. You need to, in order to have healthy soil, you need to provide some organic material like mulch or compost. You'll look to the right there, that soil is real dark brown. It's not compacted. You can kind of see the air pockets in there. It's the kind of soil you picture, earthworms would be in. This soil has a lot, that brown indicates that the soil has a lot of organic material in it. That means that when it rains, though there's some passage of water through, you want the water to pass through, but you don't want it to pass through like sand. And it gives the chance, passes slowly enough that the little bits of wood and things that are in there can absorb the water. And then that soil will stay moist and provide, have those resources, that water resource for the roots as it slowly dries out. And then to help keep your soil healthy, in addition to using mulch and compost, you'll also want to use natural fertilizers such as Milorganite or fish emulsion or just your organic fertilizer off the shelf. These are going to be less stressful. They're not going to interfere with the microbiomes and the biotic activity in the soil. And then you also want to think about avoiding compacting the soil. A lot of times people think, okay, I'm going to get out there with my rototiller and put in work some stuff in, and that will give you a lot of soil that's not as compacted in the first 8 inches or so, but underneath that, where the blade hits, it's going to compact that clay even harder. So our soil can look a lot like this, depending on what's happened in your yard. My yard, I think for the I don't know, 70 years or so before we bought the house, I think very, very few leaves were allowed to stay on the ground, because when we came in, anytime I would put a shovel in, it would look like it would be just red clay. So I've every year I top dress the beds with compost, and then I put mulch on top, and that has made a big difference. Clay soil, because it's so hot and humid here, the organic material is processed very quickly, and then we have this clay soil. It's deficient in organic matter. It's compacted. It's very small particles. So there's little airflow. It's inhospitable to soil organisms because there's not the organic material. There's slow absorption. There's more runoff at first, especially if there's been droughts. That you've seen it before, where you'll get a ton of rain, but the soil's so rock solid that the water just runs right off. There's poor drainage. Once it seeps in, it kind of really stays there, and so it can actually become just too wet for some plants. And so organic matter acts like a sponge and it stores moisture. So you really want to be adding organic matter to your soil. And a lot of people think, well, a healthy soil has earthworms, and they think, well, I'll add the earthworms. But those worms are not going to stay in, that red clay. If you put out the material for you creating a healthy environment, you start putting out compost and leaving leaf litter and things like that, you're going to start seeing your earthworms, and they're going to actually help, decompact your soil. So you'll have more earthworms, you'll have more beneficial microbes, and then you'll have a more nutrient-filled soil. I had a debris pile that was sitting there before leaf and limb for a couple of weeks on my driveway, and I went to move it to take it down to the curb, and underneath that, at the bottom between the leaves and the pavement were just tons of earthworms. So if you put the material out there, the worms will come. If you can avoid synthetic fertilizers and herbicides, that will help. Especially in the summertime, is really stressful, and work on feeding your soil.
Hey, Julie.
Yes.
We had a quick question about what you were mentioning with the tilling and compacting the soil.
Yes.
So Mary asks if the tiller makes the lower soil more compact. Mary, you may need to clarify for me, but I think what she's asking is what would it do to work in your compost? So I guess how would you work your compost in the soil without compacting it?
Right. So I mean, if you're planting a brand new bed and you don't have any plants in there, you can get out there and just sort of dig in as you're planting your plants. You do the whole bed. Don't just do around the plant. Do the whole bed, because you want to encourage the plant's roots to leave, to spread as far as possible. If you create a super hospitable environment in that one hole that you dug, and then it's just clay all around it, it's just kind of stay in that super hospital environment. But if you can, use a shovel. If you have a new bed, sometimes you use the tiller, and that's okay. It's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. If you have a brand new bed and you're just working in lots of compost, and then the worms will come and they'll start working down below.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. I will also say, you can, if you have an established garden and you want to amend your soil, you can just top dressing really does help. All that gets down in there. The worms will get in, and as you're digging through, you're planting stuff, it will all get turned in, as well as you're weeding and things. So mulch is considered any material placed on the soil surface to conserve moisture, lower soil temperatures around plant roots, and to prevent erosion and reduce weed growth. These two of my favorite types of mulch are your double ground hardwood, natural, not dyed, because the dyed hardwood mulches, you can put things like pallets and stuff like in there that has been treated wood. So with your double ground hardwood, you're getting just straight up wood. You can see what you're getting. And then chopped up leaves are fantastic. So why mulch? It prevents the compacting and crusting of soil, allowing for better water absorption. Before these recent days of rain, if you had an unmulched part of your garden bed and you went out there and tried to put a shovel in, it was going to be really dry and crusty and just hard to work with. And so when the rain comes, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to hit that hardened thing. It's going to, in the first bit of rain, is going to slide right off. It promotes water retention. The water's not going to evaporate as quickly. It has a cooler ground temperatures, and then it provides organic matter for soil organisms. So you'll see here where somebody has an established garden, and they have just kind of worked the mulch in around. So if you mulch, a good time to mulch is earlier, before the plants all start coming up. Most women put a couple inches of mulch. The magic number is like 2 to 4. You can't have too much of a good thing. If you get too much mulch, though, the water doesn't get down in there as well. And then, just like clay, you want to think about how fine your mulch is. Finer mulches you don't want to have as thick of a layer, because they're going to be compact, just like with fine particles of clay. They're going to be more compact, harder for the less spaces for the water to get through. So about 2 inches for double ground hardwood. And if you had just had a tree down and they chipped the tree for you, then that you could go a little thicker with that. You want to think about when you're watering. The ideal time is to water early in the morning, during the dew hours. When think about when the dew is falling on the ground, that is the best time to water. It's good because it is cooler, and so there's not as much water loss to the heat, but also because it allows the plant leaves to dry off during the course of the day, and it helps prevent the spread of disease by watering early in the morning. And you want to water less frequently and longer, 1 to 2 times per week, and just do it for slowly and for a longer period of time. That allows the roots of the plant to encourage them. You have that water seeping down into the dirt, and then as it gets drier on the top surface, the plant's roots will go down towards, down into the ground, and it just gives them more area to find water. And they're less, so we have an illustration just of what happens when different ways that you water. You can create watering zones where you group like plants together, that like plants that needs certain amounts of water. So for instance, in my yard, I have on the side of the house, I've got some ferns and hydrangea in the shady area, and there's plants that might need a little bit more water, and they're together. There's a general rule of thumb about 1 inch per week. That really it's a general rule of thumb. You need to think about what's happening in your yard, and what types of plants you have and how long those plants have been in the ground, how established they are. A newer plant in the full sun is going to need more water than a plant that has been there for a long time, for 5 years, and it's in the shade. Not all plants are going to need 1 inch of water per week. Measure your water. Put a rain gauge out. With your irrigation, if you're not sure really how much water is getting out there, how much water your systems are as you're turning your times, you can do the tuna can trick, where you put a tuna can out there and measure. It gives you to see exactly how much water, how much full that tuna can gets, and then you can use a soil gauge to just kind of, once you get a feel for how the water is being dispersed in your yard, and what how dry it is, and the different areas, you'll get an idea of how much watering you really needs to be happening. So you want to think about how you're going to water and hand watering, especially in a drought, is recommended. It's great for spot watering. You can use the nozzle. This bubbler is a really handy tool because it does slow drips at ground level. So that is great for allowing the water to seep into the ground and not get as much water onto the plants. And it's, I've seen it where somebody's put a little timer on the side, on like between the bubbler and the hose, and then it cuts off after 20 minutes or so. That's super handy for if you have a new tree, you have a new shrub or something like that. You can put that on, set the timer, or set your timer inside if you go inside, and then you can just kind of give that a real deep watering. Irrigation, drip irrigation is ideal. That you can, it's very slow at the ground level. You put some mulch on top of it. It's a great situation for your plants and for water conservation. They have, if you're putting in new turf, they have watering mats now that go under, like fleece, and they go underneath the turf, between the soil and the turf, and so they kind of seep in as well. And there's more efficient watering heads. If you've had an irrigation system that's been in for a long time, you want to think about how they've come out with pretty low cost, more efficient watering heads. You were really going for, in both your all your sprinklers, whether it's automated irrigation or hand sprinkler, the sprinkler that you attach to the hose, you want streams of water or large drops versus mist. The mist, you lose so much of the water, doesn't actually make it to the plant. And then soaker hoses are good. They're not as targeted as drip irrigation, but they're also handy. So when you're watering, when you want to think about that, you're watering the dirt, not the plant. So sometimes the plant is happy to be misted off, but in general, what you're thinking about are those roots. So you want to water the dirt around the plant and get that real saturated, and during that one time a week or whatever that you're watering, and not thinking so much about watering the plant. When planting new plants, you can use techniques that give the plant some banked hydration. So one thing I like to do is, as I'm digging the hole, before I start digging, get a bucket and I fill it with water, and then I take the plant out of its little pot and I stick it in the bucket full of water while I'm digging the hole. And that allows the roots to absorb water, but and then it also kind of gets in there, and so it's easier to sort of work the roots out of, if they've been, especially if it's root bound, you can kind of work the roots a little bit. And then there's something called mudding in or puddling in, where you have dug your hole and then you go ahead and fill that hole with water and let it start to seep in, and then you put the plant in, and then you fill the hole with water again, and then once it's seeped in, you go ahead and infill, and that will give your plant a good couple of days worth of moisture and encourage the roots to spread out. One thing to note about watering: more plants die from overwatering than from underwatering, so from drought. So you when you're doing this, especially if you're talking about drought tolerant plants, we're talking about soaking your dirt, soaking your soil, once or twice a week, not every day. Irrigation systems, super important they can be very efficient tools, but it's really important to have your system checked regularly. We've all seen the broken emitter where the water's just pouring down the sidewalk. Select drip irrigation and then put it under mulch whenever possible. So in this situation here on the right in this picture, you can see where the irrigation tubing is going by all the plants, and you can kind of tell where the soil is darker, where the water's seeped in. And so it would be ideal if at this point too, they just put a layer of mulch over all of that, and then that would help prevent evaporation, the moisture from evaporating from the soil as quickly. And then you want to replace your conventional spray fan nozzles, those pop-up nozzles that just spray in one direction, with a rotating nozzle that delivers. The newer nozzles deliver water slower with bigger drops, and then you can also target them better, and then they go back and forth. So while it's while it's going this way, the place that it just watered, the water's soaking in, and it comes back and it waters again, then it soaks in. So just replacing one conventional spray fan nozzle with a rotating nozzle can save up to 1,300 gallons of water a year. Use a timer. Again, you want to create zones where you have, your different watering zones so that your plants that need as much water aren't getting as much water, and then water for longer periods of time, less often. Here's a little illustration. The illustration B is your old school pop-up nozzle. You can see how misty the water is. A lot of that water is being lost to the atmosphere. A is the newer nozzle, and it's got those larger drops. This is the same thing with your water sprinkler. I have one that is broken. It's terrible. It's a beautiful little sprinkler, but it just sprays mist everywhere. It's not an efficient sprinkler, and you can't target it. So it's not a good one to use. And you'll see the difference in the water flow per minute, the gallons per minute. On the A, it's 1.9 versus 2.7. So you're using a lot less water per cycle, and a lot more water is getting to the plant. So rules of thumb with watering: you want larger drops, slower flow. You want to encourage your roots to go deep, not shallow, and you want to prevent waste. Oh gosh, it's something like 50%, like 60% of water that's used is used for outdoor purposes, and 50% of that water is wasted. And then to water during the dew period. And this illustration on the right, shows you the far right is shallow, very frequent watering. So if you water 20 minutes a day, every day, you would end up with a plant that had most of its roots would be towards the top. So the problem with that is that when it's very susceptible to the soil drying out, it doesn't really have many other options. So it dries out on top, and their plant's going to die or suffer. The deep and frequent. So if you were out there watering for an hour and a half every day, you would end up having a plant that had really deep roots. And the problem with that is that when you get a little shower like we just had here, where it passes through, it's not getting much of that water because it doesn't have roots at the top surface. So ideally you have a plant with roots that are really kind of established. You got roots at the top, you got roots at the bottom, so it has some options when it's looking for water. So here we go. We're talking about our sprinklers and our soaker hoses. Same thing. Here's this illustration of a soaker hose. You want larger drops in your streams and targeted areas. Ideally, if you're using a sprinkler, you want an adjustable range so you're not watering your driveway. You want to put it on a timer. I can't tell you how many times I've set the sprinkler out and then gotten sidetracked and let it run too long. And then when possible, go for ground level watering with the soaker hose, or with a lower sprays for ground level watering versus aerial watering. Let's see.
Julie?
Yes.
So we had a question about kind of a rule of thumb to know if you've watered an area 1 inch amount.
Yes.
Did you have any?
Yes,
suggestions
I have another slide. I think it's the next one. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, and then you can, if that's not answered, we can talk a little bit more. Ask some follow-up questions. So when we're talking about watering, a lot of people think about rain barrels. Rain barrels are great for water collection and storage, but you need to think about your placement. Placement is crucial because a lot of times we think about collecting the water, but we don't think about how we're going to use the water, or just all the mechanics that are involved in using the water. So it needs to be on a base that needs to be high enough to where you can actually get the water out. The nozzle is often down at the bottom. So if you're like thinking, oh, I'm going to fill buckets, or I'm going to attach a hose, you want to make sure it's close enough to the plant that you're planning on watering with it. And then Athens-Area County has some great rain barrel resources. They actually have occasionally classes on how to make a rain barrel, and then they all the time have instructions on how to make a rain barrel by yourself. And then you can also purchase a rain barrel from them. So if you just Google Athens-Area County and rain barrel, this URL there will pop up. Um, so knowing when to water, it's best to do it before plants get stressed. There's a couple of different things that you can do. This is a very stressed hydrangea here. You can tell how wilty it is. And you'll hear a screwdriver test where you put the screwdriver into the ground and it should be able to pass through pretty flathead screwdriver pretty easily. And then if you pull it up and it's got some dirt on it, then you know you've got some moisture in there. If it comes up and it's completely clean, then you need to water. There's using a water meter, that I've got one here, and so you can see that where you can put the meter in and it lets you know if it's moist enough in there or not, if you need to water. And then there's the soil clumping test, where if you go out to your garden and you pick up a ball of soil and then you clump it together and then kind of shake, just give it a little shake as you release your hand, it should stay pretty well clumped, like you can see on the left there. If you open your hand and you go like this and it just immediately falls apart, then that's that's dry. You need to water. But on the other hand, if you went like this and all the dirt squeezed out of your hand, or you could actually make like a little pot and it would stay there, that's too moist. That's too moist. You've watered too much. So those are some things that you can do to just kind of see how dry your ground is. Some tips for figuring out how much water you need to be, how long you need to be watering in certain areas. I have areas where in the front with south facing, it needs watering more frequently, and because it just dries out quite quicker. Did that answer the question?
I believe so. I will let you know if he asks any more.
Okay. So you want to think about your plant choices. You want to have we've all heard right plant, right place. So you also want to think right plant, right place, right time. Your plant choice matters. Just because a plant likes full sun and heat doesn't mean that it will tolerate dry conditions. Dahlias thrive in full sun, but they need consistent watering. Drought tolerant plants, we immediately think about cactus. Georgia gardeners need plants that can tolerate wet and dry conditions, and we often think about cactus and yuccas, and there are cactus and yuccas, like this is actually one from around the corner, that do great here. Succulents, there's many varieties of succulents and sedums that do great. You can think about native plants, choosing native plants. Natives are adapted to our environment. Does that mean that all Georgia natives are drought tolerant? No, it doesn't. If you choose a fern or something that's used to being along the stream, you're going to have to, be watering that in order to keep it alive. So you want Piedmont, if you're planting in the sun, Piedmont sun-loving plants. That when you're looking for the natives for this area. Natives are important pollinators. They're important to the local ecosystem, and they take less resources to grow. This is from the Keep Athens Beautiful. The benefits of native plants is that they don't require fertilizer. Our soil is what they like. Native plants require fewer pesticides than lawns. Native plants require less water than lawns. They help reduce air pollution by eliminating mowing. They provide shelter and food for wildlife. And then they promote biodiversity and stewardship of our natural heritage. We are, in some of the native plants where we're kind of struggling to keep those around because of the habitat loss. And they save, in the long run, they save money. Bee balm. I remember buying my first bee balm at a Master Gardener sale, and the person telling me that once you have a little bee balm, you'll have a lot. And it's true. It comes back every year. And if it gets stressed and dies back in the drought, it comes back. It's a great plant. So there's some characteristics of drought tolerant plants. There's some plants you'll notice that have like silvery plants with downy leaves. They're often drought tolerant. If you think about lamb's ear, Russian sage, dusty miller, yarrows, your silvery sage, or a lot of your herbs, your oregano and the lavender and downy thyme, and then lychnis or rose campion. All those plants are drought tolerant. There's also the family of the waxy leaved plants. So they have that thick cuticle that helps with water retention, like your Sasanqua camellia, native camellia, your tea olives, gardenias, wax begonias, and then your rosemaries, and then your hollies. When you're choosing your plant site, consider what the plant needs. You know, if it's a full sun plant, but you're putting it in a very exposed south-facing area, a little shade in the afternoon can be a welcome relief. You know, competition from, you think about the tree can provide shade, but it can also be competition. So, you know, a shady spot can get very dry. Just because you're planting something in the shade doesn't mean that it's gonna, you know, it's not gonna be dry there. Think about the different zones in your yard. Here's an example of the right of euphorbia. It loves, you know, the full sun. So here's an illustration. This person here has some St. John's wort, and then they've got one little hosta there off to the side, and then a fern and a hellebore or a Litten rose there. And you can tell the plant that's the happiest. The St. John's wort is just going gangbusters. And the Litten rose will, you know, it's as it established, it'll spread around there probably. But then that fern and that one fern and hosta, they're probably, you know, going to struggle to stay alive. It's, even though they're close to the shade of the tree, it's a pretty stressful area. You know, they're going to get, in addition to the sun, they're going to get all that reflected heat off the pavement. You want to group your plants with like needs together. As I mentioned before, creating zones in your yard. You want to focus your watering resources on higher profile areas. So if you have, you know, you love a plant that needs a lot of water, then you want to put it someplace where you're really going to enjoy it, and you know, not like have big hosta bed, you know, back in the far back where no one ever sees it. So here's an example of plants without like needs that are grouped together. You've got your hydrangea there that's going to need more water in a drought than your ornamental grass and the yucca. So, you know, it would end up saving water if the yucca and the ornamental grasses were put in a different zone. Here's another example of that. You've got your cactus in the middle of a lawn. So the lawn is going to need a lot more water than that cactus there. And then here's somewhere somebody's done a really good job. They've grouped their ferns and their hosta together. So these plants have very similar water needs. And then this is a nice drought tolerant garden. These plants all have, you know, they're all pretty drought tolerant. You've got your sedums and the euphorbia in the back, and maybe some dusty miller back there. Here's another example, and you know these plants where they're all infilled. You've got a couple types of coneflowers and some black-eyed Susans and some salvias back there. These are all going to be plants that you just aren't going to need to water as much as you will in a drought. They will need some water, but you won't have to water them as much. So you want to choose optimal planting times. Give those plants a chance to get established for the stress of the summer heat. Plant them in the spring or the fall. If you plant the plant too late, the roots aren't going to be able to have a chance to get established before, and you know, get in place before the stresses of the summer heat come, and you're going to end up struggling to keep that plant alive all summer and ultimately use considerably more water. Late fall is the best time to plant woody perennials and trees. Drought tolerance isn't immediate. All plants will need more attention for the first year or 2 or 3 in the case of, you know, your shrubs and trees. Which can take longer, but once established, they will ultimately need less water than your smaller perennials. Even once established, you still need to take in environmental factors. I can't tell you how many times in the very beginning as a gardener I planted coneflowers thinking they're drought tolerant, and then I didn't water them in the summer and they died. So now, you know, I realized this because my father he had his garden. He went out of town for the summer, and he had his irrigation system, drip irrigation, on a timer. and the timer broke. We didn't realize it. And his coneflowers, they were gorgeous. I mean, the whole garden was just gorgeous. It was just a real slow drip. And he came home and he had this enormous water bill. And I realized, oh, well, they actually like water, so now I have coneflowers that they've been in for many years. And when the drought comes, they don't need as much water. But the first couple of years, they really did need some consistent watering. Here's an example. This is a garden bed that we put in 5 Points in Athens, where it got hit by it's a raised bed, and it got hit by a truck. And so they decided that they didn't want us to maintain it. About 6 months ago, they said, let's not water or do anything with it anymore until we're gonna redo the bed. So a couple weeks ago, we had those real high temperatures. It was 90 degrees. We also at the same time was very dry. There was low humidity. We had those fire risk warnings. And these coneflowers and black-eyed Susans that are so crispy here in this picture, those have been in there for several years. You can see what did well. They've got their thyme in the front and the yucca in the back. But so this bed, you think about, even though those plants were established, it's in a full sun all afternoon. There's not a tree anywhere near that bed. And then it's also raised up, and so water drains out pretty quickly. There's not a lot of retention in there. And it will be interesting to see, how the summer goes, if these were established enough to survive the summer, just as small plants next year. But this is a great example of considering, your environmental factors. A raised bed, or something that drains, doesn't have a tree, it's gonna need more water. The coneflowers in my yard did fine that week. So then I'll talk a little bit about lawns. This is just a beautiful lawn. And so turf is one of the most water consumptive and chemically intensive items in the yard. There's some strategies you can have a water efficient lawn. You can use drought tolerant grasses, or some lawn alternatives. Start watering infrequently and deeply once a week for a longer period of time. Resist the temptation to cut it real low to the ground. Keep a pretty long blade so that the roots stay shaded and you don't lose your water that's in the soil. Don't fertilize in the summertime. It's just going to put more stress for growth on the grass and require more water and stress the plant. And then avoid herbicides in the summer, which can also be stressful. Some drought tolerant grasses and alternatives ideas. The UGA has this tip-tuff Bermuda grass, and Bermuda grasses in general are drought tolerant. They are full sun only. Centipede, it tolerates a little bit more shade. St. Augustine is even more shade tolerant. The former county extension agent, Amanda Tidro, wrote an article where she recommended, moss. So she was like, if you have moss growing in your lawn in the shady area, why fight it? Just go ahead and embrace the moss. You're going to be battling to get grass to grow there anyway, and it is a drought tolerant alternative. Also dwarf mondo grass. Here's actually a picture on the right. This is mowed dwarf mondo grass. We have one yard that we work at where they have dwarf mondo as their back lawn. It needs no irrigation. They plant it with daffodils, and they don't mow it at all in the spring, and the daffodils come up through it. It's really beautiful. And then somewhere I read somebody suggested green and gold, the native plant. It's a ground cover. If you weren't walking on it or using it as a lawn, that might be an alternative. This is one yard that is around the corner from me where the person has said, okay, well, I'm just going full on Lenten roses. We're not going to do any grass. We're just going to have hellebores. And hellebores are very drought tolerant. They've got that waxy cuticle as well. This person just eliminated their grass altogether, and you'll notice, on the right with the gravel, they've got the porous surface. They've got drought tolerant plants. It's well mulched. So some ideas about plants. When I think about, the plants that are in my yard that I really don't need to water very much, salvia. There's so many different types of salvia, and they're just a really great. They're great for pollinators. They're and hummingbirds, and there's just a lot of different varieties, a lot of different sizes. Cleome is not native, but it's actually native, well, of South America, but it is, reseeds. It is great for pollinators. It doesn't need very much water. Rose of Sharon, it can actually be a little bit of a pest, but it's hard to yeah, it's hard to pull it. It doesn't need any water at all, and then you have those flowers in the summertime that the pollinators love. Ageratum reseeds on its own. It comes up in the fall with the flower. The flowers come out in the fall when other things aren't blooming. Same with swamp sunflower. Both of those, reseed. Swamp sunflower will tolerate wet, tolerates dry, and it's a fall bloomer that the birds love to eat the seeds of, and it does it's not invasive, but it does reseed readily. So you have to be sure, if you don't want more of it, to cut the seed heads off, which eliminates, your goldfinches don't visit as much. Spiderwort is off here on the right. The purple is another one that doesn't really need much any watering and thrives in the area. Gardenias, once they're established, Sasanqua camellias. Tea olives, crocosmia, that's one that can get in the thuggish, but some people will just put it in a container. It spreads a lot. It's a bulb, and the hummingbirds love it. Some viburnums, euphorbias, sedums, iris are great. They love water. They love dry. They do great. Hellebores, your Lenten roses, magnolias. Yarrow and Baptisia. Baptisia is another one. It's got great spring blossoms. It's a native. It needs very little water. It goes dormant in the summer if it gets too drought, but it will come back. The most drought tolerant of the hydrangeas are these two natives, Annabelle hydrangea and oak leaf hydrangea, and they don't need as much water as the others. So here is an example of this is another house that we work at that is the bearded iris. They have many types of iris. The iris loves full sun to part shade. It's very drought tolerant once established. It's ideal. This doesn't happen in this yard, but it's ideal for them to be divided every 2 to 3 years. You'll get more blooms that way. Cleome, full sun, 2 to 3 feet tall. This is in the middle. That's the pink in the middle. Pink flowers are taller. Summer blooming, it blooms, June until frost. It recedes easily. Columbines, one of my favorites. Full sun, part shade. I think of it more of as a part shade plant. It's about 1 to 2 feet tall. The red one on the left there is the native columbine. It attracts hummingbirds, and it's deer resistant. Spring blooming bulbs are your crocuses, your hydrangeas, your hyacinths and your daffodils, alliums. They're good. They spring. They bloom in the spring, and then when it gets too hot, they go dormant. Cone flowers are a favorite of most gardeners. They self-sow. They attract pollinators. They are somewhat deer resistant. I've already seen the deer eating some around town here when it got drier, but they won't eat them all the way to the ground. They'll generally survive. The seeds attract birds, and they are natives. Here's your Baptisia, your false indigo. They also, it's just purples in the front, and then there's also yellow and white varieties. They get to be kind of a larger shrub with the pretty gray-green foliage, and it is a native as well. And then here's a couple examples of salvia, your blue-black there, and then the red in the front, and you'll see in the back there's a holly. There's many varieties of salvia. And penstemon is another great one. It's got the pretty, some varieties have the reddish foliage, very drought tolerant, has a nice bloom. It's a native. And then sedums are a favorite. You can, there's so many different types of sedums. And they are wonderful for pollinators. They're deer resistant. The one on the right, the citron colored one is ground cover, and then you have, you know, the taller one there with the large pink blossoms. There's just so many different types of sedums. Gora it is drought tolerant as well, and you know, it's fairly compact, has some nice blossoms there that kind of they call dancing butterflies is one variety, and they do look like that, and it attracts butterflies. Here's another favorite of mine, mountain mint. It's got these green flowers. It's a native. It has a mint, you know, smell to it when you're working around it. It spreads some, but not it doesn't spread like mint does. And it does attract butterflies. It gets to be about 1 to 3 feet tall. Fothergilla is a nice native shrub. It blooms in early spring before the leaves appear, and will keep those blooms for a while after the leaves appear. It's full sun to part shade. Comes in dwarf and larger varieties. Loses its leaves in the wintertime, deciduous, and it's a native. Ansonia is another nice native. It has interesting foliage, kind of finer foliage, kind of understated blossom. And but it really, where it's most showy is in the fall. It gets a real bright colors in the fall, and it is deer tolerant. Beautyberry, your calicarpa. It is really great, just nice shrub, full sun to part shade. It's very, you can see in this this fuller size picture here, this very small flowers. Where it really shines is in the fall when it gets its purple berries. They're very beautiful and the birds love them. There is also, just to warn you, there's a non-native beautyberry bush. Go for the native. It's gonna have more benefits to the native pollinators. They both will do well in your landscape, but if you have a choice, go with the native. Spice bush, another native, and it blooms from April to July. It's deer tolerant. It's a larger shrub. And then this is this big shrub. The bottlebrush buckeye is a great showstopper when it gets its blossoms with the big, long bottlebrush-looking blossoms. It is also a native. And here are some hydrangeas. Here's an example of a bed of Annabelle hydrangeas. I know that this yard is not, is hand watered, and it's not irrigated, and these hydrangeas are very well established, and they do great. Serviceberry is a lovely tree. It gets a pretty small blossom in the spring. Its habit is pretty, loose and kind of a delicate habit to it. It gets to be about 20 feet tall, and then it gets nice berries, the smaller berries that the birds like, but it has a great fall color too. And then ornamental grasses, real tough. They, some are showy, like this pink muley grass that gets these pink blossoms in the fall. They are great for wildlife and for the environment. They provide winter interest, and they provide shelter for various insects and things in the winter. Herbs. Rosemary, there's a native, and then your Mediterranean rosemaries, they do very well, very drought tolerant. Woolly thyme, oregano, sage. If you think about it, they have that silvery fennel, and then lavender. French or Spanish lavender does pretty well here. English lavender does not. This on the left is of the native rosemary. It's much smaller plant, doesn't get big like the other rosemary. And then the front actually is green and gold coming up around it. And then on the right is a lavender, and you really can't tell, but this lavender is covered with bees. Here's the smoke bush is another really beautiful shrub. It's not native to this area, but it does well. It has beautiful maroon circular leaves, and gets to be quite big, 10 to 15 feet tall. And the flowers look like plumes of smoke, and it is deer tolerant. So, if you fall in love with a plant that needs a lot of water, make sure to put it in an area that you'll enjoy it. If possible, place a rain barrel near the plant. So when you have that week or two without rain, you have, easy, just run the hose to the plant and put that bubbler on it, or put it on a real low drip into it, and let it soak it, give it a good soak. When you're purchasing the plants, when you're at the plant sales in the spring, really think about how you're going to feel about that plant in the middle of summer. Like what seems easy in April, when that second or third month of watering, you might feel differently about the plants. And then just remember, as you're moving forward, to select your plants wisely, group plants with like needs together, and then to water well during establishment. It's just going to create a healthy root system. Your plant's going to live longer and need less water ultimately. And here's a few resources. This top one has a dry native plant recommendations. There's a pretty substantial list of natives. Athens-Clarke County Waterwise program. It's a great program. You can actually, I told that story about my father with the drip, the broken timer. Now he could have signed up for this program, and when his water use started to spike that day, he would have gotten an alert. And so you get an alert, tells you that when you have a regular, when they actually will say, oh, we think you have a leak, and then you can check it out. And then the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. If you this is for the Georgia plants, native Georgia plants, and then you can select to narrow your plants to dry conditions, and it will give you recommendations. Then we'll open it up for questions.
All right, thank you. That was awesome. I do not have any questions in the chat right now, but everybody just let loose if you've got them. Feel free to put them in the chat. And at this point, I'm happy if y'all want to unmute and just ask questions that way. While we're waiting on your questions, do you mind if I share my screen one more time, Julie? Okay. I'm going to pull up another screen. I think.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, perfect. We've got one question while I'm pulling it up. They ask, are there any plants that do better in containers?
Yes. Your Dusty Miller and the salvias, the petunias, they're all plants. Rosemaries, there's a nice drooping rosemary that goes over the edge. All those plants are gonna be more heat tolerant than, and then ornamental grasses are great. You can put an ornamental grass in there and then put something that that needs, like calibraceae or something, or blue days that need as a nice color around the base of it. Blue days is another. You still need to water it, but it does well in the heat and the sun.
Awesome. And I cannot seem to access my chat while I'm sharing the screen. It seems to be glitching. Julie, do you mind looking at the chat for me?
Yeah, so the question here says about wood chips, that fresh wood chips draw too much nitrogen. My research, that is a very common common thinking, but the newer research that I have seen, there's a great gardening podcast from Joe Lample, who is a gardener in Marietta, Georgia, and has a PBS show and then a podcast, but he has a whole thing dedicated to mulch, and he has said that he thinks that is a myth. And from my experience in using fresh wood chips places, I really have not seen that to be detrimental to the plant. It's the plant ultimately that's going to break down, and what's happening at the top is just not going to really impact that what's happening down in the soil, and you're going to get the benefit of that moisture retention and then the organic matter breaking down.
All right. Well, I won't keep everybody here if there aren't any more questions, but feel free to keep them coming if you have them. But thank you, Julie, for the great presentation. As you're talking, it's raining outside, so I don't think any of us have to go water our plants just yet.
It's great to see the rain.
Yes. Well, we hope to see the rest of you at our next class on planting for pollinators. A lot of the plants that Julie talked about are great pollinator plants as well, so it all ties in together. But please take our evaluation. We listen to y'all's responses and we apply them to our next classes. So we definitely appreciate your feedback, and we just appreciate you all being here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
All right, I'll leave it on for just a minute or two and then I'll say goodnight.